Good evening. This is the Wine of Life podcast. I'm Wes. Tonight we're going to be continuing not with the study of Ecclesiastes, but ideas involving the book of Ecclesiastes. And through this whole thing, I'm going to be going through the whole book of Ecclesiastes. We just did chapters 1 through 3. And now I'm going to do a comparison of if you start to ask the same questions, would you come to the same types of conclusions that the writer of Ecclesiastes ultimately does? And we're going to be looking through the writings of Friedrich Nietzsche, who had very similar questions that the writer of Ecclesiastes did. And he was struggling with the same issues. And now, obviously, he was coming at it from a different place. There's a sort of presupposition of atheism, whereas there's a presupposition of God as creator in Ecclesiastes. And so they start from different points. They obviously end up at different points, but we're going to be looking at the philosophy that he ultimately comes to in the book Thus Spake Zarathustra, the book for everyone and no one at the same time. So we're going to be looking at that first. So we're going to jump right into that. And we're going to start off with Ecce Homo. This is the sort of biography that he wrote about himself, but he talks about what his main purpose was. Let's see if we can get here. My life's work. This is what he says. He says, my life's work in preparing humanity for a moment of intense self-examination, a time of reckoning when it will look backwards and outwards and emerge from the dominion of chance and priests, and for the first time ask itself the fundamental questions about why and for what. Very similar questions that we find in Ecclesiastes. This task is the necessary consequence of the knowledge that humanity is not capable of setting itself on the right path. Again, the same conclusions that writer of Ecclesiastes come to. What is crooked cannot be set straight. That it is not in any way subject to divine rule. That's where he would differ. On the contrary, that actually, precisely among the most holy regarded values, the instinct for denial, the instinct for decadence, has been seductively in charge. The question concerning the origin of moral value is therefore for me a question of the first order, because it is crucial for the future of humanity. So he starts off with saying that the whole goal of his program, and you could start with the birth of tragedy, is trying to find out where we got values from in the first place and then trying to reevaluate those values. That's what he was trying to do. And so he starts off with that. And we move on to this point here when he talks about what Zarathustra is supposed to be. Zarathustra is from Thus Spake Zarathustra. It says, I shall now tell you the story of Zarathustra. The basic idea of this book, the notion of eternal recurrence, this highest formula of affirmation that could ever have been achieved, was conceived in August of 1881. And we'll talk about that. That is his cosmology. So this is what the writer of Ecclesiastes has to say about very similar questions. In Ecclesiastes 6 through 12, it says this, Yea, though he live 1,000 years, twice told, yet has he seen no good. Do not all go to one place. He's talking about death, and that even if time went on and on and on, and we'll talk about what the eternal recurrence means for Nietzsche, even if it went on and on and on, everything goes to the same place. Everything is the same. He says, all the labor of man is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not filled. For what has the wise more than the fool? What has the poor that knows to walk before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. That is, how do we know what's right and what's wrong? Even if you do, and you don't follow your instinct and you don't follow your desire, what is the difference between that and wisdom and having and following by the sight of the eyes, or following the light? What is the difference between light and darkness? He says, that which has been is named already, and it is known that it is man. Neither may he contend with him that is mightier than he. And this is how Nietzsche also separates the two classes, that there are master morals and there are slave morals. He says, seeing there be many that increase vanity, what is man the better? For who knows what is good for man in this life, all the days of his vain life which he spends as a shadow? For who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun? So he's questioning eternity as well, what's going to happen afterwards. And so this is what the writer of Ecclesiastes is struggling with. What we would assume would be Solomon or a king of some sort. This is what the writer of Ecclesiastes is struggling with, and this is what Nietzsche is struggling with. So there's the idea of eternal recurrence going on, and within Nietzsche, he's saying that everything ultimately comes back around and everything is relived over and over and over, that everything is eternal, whereas the book of Ecclesiastes, death is an end. And because death is an end, that in and of itself makes things irrelevant. Death is a sort of equaling out. What is the difference between wisdom and foolishness? If we all die in the end, that the end happens all at the same time. So that's what the writer of Ecclesiastes is struggling with, and that's what Nietzsche is struggling with. So what Nietzsche wanted to do was totally reform the idea of being. And we're going to read another bit from Ecce Homo real fast. And he says, that's the formula for greatness. This is what he wants to do. He says here in particular we have to start to rethink. That is, the ideas of diet, location, climate, recreation, the whole casuistry of self-love are by far more important than anything else that has hitherto been considered essential by us. All those things that mankind has until now thought about with such earnestness are not even realities. They are mere fancies, indeed lies, arising from the bad instincts of sick and in the truest sense harmful nature, such concepts as God, soul, virtue, sin, the hereafter, truth, eternal life. And yet we look for the greatness of human nature, its divinity in them. All questions of politics, the social order, of education have been thoroughly falsified because the most harmful people were accepted by us as great men by being taught to despise the so-called trivial matters, which are really the fundamental concerns of life. So what he's doing here is he's rejecting the idea of metaphysics at all, that there is no, there's an eternal recurrence in existence, and that there is no purpose to anything. And so we can't reach any notion of purpose because there is no God, there is no soul, there is no spirit, there is no truth. And when he says truth, he's not saying that he denies, basic things like the existence of the earth or the existence of himself. He's not calling that into question with regards to material. What he's saying is truth is what we do with the materials that exist. What is supposed to be the purpose of man is what truth is, not that man exists. Facts don't necessitate truth. Anybody can name off a group of facts. They have to have a certain amount of meaning to them for them to be stated in any notion of truth. And so because he rejected any idea of intrinsic value, he rejected all notions of equality. So when we finally get into Zarathustra here, this is what he says about the people who believe in equality. He really did not like these people. And when he's talking here, he's not talking about religious people. He believes that religion in and of itself brings up these ideas, but here he's actually criticizing the sort of atheist democratic liberals of his day. He was very anti-communitarian. He was very much a individual, and he was very intense upon individualism. But this is what he says. He says, "Distrust all those who talk much of their justice. Verily in their souls not only is honey lacking, and when they call themselves the good and just, forget not that for them to be Pharisees nothing is lacking but power. My friends, I will not be mixed up and confounded with others. There are those who preach my doctrine of life and are at the same time preachers of equality and tarantulas." Now, when he says my doctrine of life, he's talking about the rejection of metaphysical ideas like God and the soul and spirit. So there are atheists who are saying they're liberals, but at the same time they're preachers of equality, that they're holding on to certain metaphysical ideas and are therefore tarantulas. He says that they speak in favor of life, though they sit in their den, these poison spiders, and withdrawn from life is because they would thereby do injury. To those would they thereby do injury who have power at present. For those the preaching of death is still most at home. Were it otherwise, then would the tarantulas teach otherwise, and they themselves were formerly the best world maligners and heretic burners. With these preachers of equality I will not be mixed up and confounded, for thus speaketh justice unto me, men are not equal, and neither shall they become so. What would be my love to the Superman if I spake otherwise? So in Thus Spake Zarathustra, he's speaking about the fact, if there is no intrinsic qualities at all, if there's no metaphysics, then there is no idea of equality. And therefore, when you're talking about equality, you have to talk about it from an extrinsic point of view, and that means that extrinsically, people are not equal. Let's say myself and LeBron James, we are not equals athletically. He can do things I can't do. And so to claim that we're equal and to claim that I have some sort of right to, say, make the same amount of money performing some sort of athletic act would be ridiculous, and it would be wrong. And so Nietzsche was saying the people who are the best are the people who should be at the top. So he was very much against democracy. He was very much against equality. And this is the ideas of the Superman has been used to perpetuate this idea that he was some sort of far-right type of person. The Nazis obviously used him and his ideas, but he was against nationalism. He was against socialism. He was reacting as an individual against the ideas of communitarians like Hegel and Rousseau. And he was very critical of those ideas because he believed that the individual needs to move beyond, in an evolutionary sense, what man is now. And so he believed in this movement where the Superman was someone who moved beyond what man was currently, and he did that by being as sort of a bridge. And we'll read that from Zarathustra later on. So I want to talk about how he came to the idea of writing Zarathustra in relation to how the person who wrote Ecclesiastes is a king in Israel. Being the king in Israel, particularly a son of David, meant that you were to be the Messiah. That was sort of the promise. If we read something like Psalm 110, clearly the son of David was supposed to be the one who sat on the throne for all eternity, and was also someone who would be considered David's Lord as well. So the Messiah was to be the son of David and Lord at the same time. This is something that Jesus brought up when arguing with the, or being questioned or questioning the Pharisees that he was dealing with of his day. And so he decided here to take on the character of Zarathustra. Zarathustra is the Western name for Zoroaster. He was the prophet of the religion we now call Zoroastrianism. He wrote the Zend Avesta, which is about the god Ahura Mazda and the evil spirit Angra Mainyu. I'm probably not saying that right. But anyways, this was in like sort of Persia. They've moved on to India. There's a lot of persecution going on with them in Islamic countries right now, so they're kind of struggling to stay. But we know about them from the Bible. Darius was probably one of those. The priesthood of the Zoroastrians are called Magi, and the Magi are the ones who visited Christ at his birth. So he decided to take on this because Zarathustra, who some people would say maybe wrote in the 9th century BC, some people say later, some people say before, but we'll kind of stick with that. He created this idea of good and evil, that there was a sort of balanced scale, and that there was a heaven and a hell. He gave a very detailed theology of heaven and hell, rewards and punishment, performing good, performing evil, and that at the end of time, when you die, you're going to go to this good and bad, and then there's going to be a time when Ahura Mazda will judge you afterwards, and there will be another judgment that decides whether you go to paradise or whether you go into eternal torment. And so this idea of creating values was something that Nietzsche was completely against. And so he decided to take on the person who he thought gave forward the best type of value system, and a lot of people see the value system that he put forward and see it being used in Christianity. Many of the things, like the idea of the millennial, for instance, that was written well back in Zoroastrianism. That's not to say that they were the same, but the idea of a coming Messiah, all of these things, the fact that the Magi visited Christ in the first place, there were some things that were obviously true. The idea of heaven and hell, those ideas are not really fleshed out in the Old Testament as much as they are in the New Testament. But back then, the most fleshed out idea of heaven and hell and judgment and things of that nature was found in Zoroastrianism, in his writings in the Zend-Avesta. So when he starts talking about Zoroaster, we'll read the very first bits here. He starts to put him in context with the creator of values, but also with Christ. This is how he sees himself. I'm reading from the very first part, Zarathustra's prologue. It says, when Zarathustra was 30 years old, and he's using 30 years old in the context of Christ starting his ministry from Luke 3:23. He says, he left his home in the lake of his home and went into the mountains. And there he enjoyed his spirit and his solitude, and for 10 years did not weary of it. But at last his heart changed, and rising one morning with the rosy dawn, he went before the sun and spake thus unto it, Thou great star, what would be thy happiness, if thou hast not those from whom thou shinest? For 10 years hast thou climbed hither unto my cave, thou wouldst have wearied of thy light and of the journey, had it not been for me, mine eagle and my serpent. But we awaited every morning, took thee from thine overflow, and blessed thee for it. Lo, I am weary of my wisdom. Like the bee that has gathered too much honey, I need hands outstretched to take it. I would fain bestow and distribute, until the wise have once more become joyous in their folly, and the poor happy in their riches. Therefore must I descend into the deep, as thou doest in the evening, when thou goest behind the sea, and givest light also to the nether world, thou exuberant star. Like thee I must go down, as men say, to whom I shall descend. Bless me then, thou tranquil eye, that thou can hold even the greatest happiness without envy. Bless the cup that is about to overflow, that the water may flow golden out of it, and carry everywhere the reflection of thy bliss. Lo, this cup is again going to empty itself, and Zarathustra is again going to be a man. Thus began Zarathustra's down-going. So we see there's already this idea of the incarnation, of the descent of the divine to become a man. And so he's comparing himself with regards to Zoroaster and the ministry of Christ, creating these values. A large portion of the writings of Nietzsche were dedicated to criticizing the Christianity of his day, because he was dealing with state Christianity. He hated the ideas of virtue, morality, and not that he didn't take it seriously, but he hated the ideas of pity, the ideas of helping those who are struggling. It's a very strong individualism, something that we probably try and live out today in a lot of areas of our society. We're very atomic in our ideas. So he's starting out with this notion of an incarnation where he's going down to become a man again. And he has these metamorphoses. There are 3 stages to these particular type of metamorphoses that are the same or run parallel with the stages of history for the individual that Zoroaster gives. So Zoroaster gives this idea of birth, death, and the beyond. But the metamorphoses of the spirit for the individual of Zarathustra is different, and it does not deal, of course, with the beyond, because he didn't believe in that. So in the first part of the 3 metamorphoses of Zarathustra, he says, the 3 metamorphoses of the spirit do I designate to you, how the spirit becomes a camel, the camel a lion, and the lion a child. So camel, lion, and child are his 3 metamorphoses. Many heavy things are there for the spirit, the strong load-bearing spirit in which reverence dwells. For the heavy and the heaviest longs its strength. What is heavy? So asks the load-bearing spirit, then kneels down like the camel and wants to be well laden. What is the heaviest thing, ye heroes? Asketh the load-bearing spirit, that I may take it upon me and rejoice in my strength. Is it not this, to humiliate oneself in order to mortify one's pride, to exhibit one's folly in order to mock at one's wisdom? Or is it this, to desert our cause when it celebrates its triumph, to ascend high mountains to tempt the tempter? Or is it this, to feed on the acorns and grass of knowledge, and for the sake of truth to suffer hunger of soul? Or is it this, to be sick and dismiss comforters, and make friends of the deaf who never hear thy requests? Or is it this, to go into foul water when it is the water of truth, and not disclaim cold frogs and hot toads? Or is it this, to love those who despise us, and gives one hand to the phantom when it is going to frighten us? All these heaviest things the load-bearing spirit takes upon itself, and like the camel, which when laden hastens into the wilderness, so hastens the spirit into its wilderness. So again, we see the idea of going into the wilderness. We see a direct reference to Christianity. After the baptism of Christ, when he was about 30, as it says in Luke 3:23, he was then taken into the wilderness to be tempted by Satan. So now we're in the wilderness for the second metamorphosis. It says, but in the loneliest wilderness happens the second metamorphosis. Here the spirit becomes a lion. Freedom will it capture, and lordship in its own wilderness. The last lord it here seeks. Hostile will it be to him and to its last god. For victory will it struggle with the great dragon. And so here's a reference to Revelation 12. It says, what is the great dragon, which the spirit is no longer inclined to call Lord and God? Thou shalt is the great dragon called, but the spirit of the lion saith, I will. And so here's a direct rejection of the law of God and saying, I will, instead of accepting thou shalt. He inverts everything and claims that God, who says thou shalt, is in fact the great dragon, Satan, whereas the lion, in reference to Christ, the Lion of Judah, now must be the I will, which is the individual that he's taking upon himself to do as he pleases. This is the complete opposite, even of the conclusions, the struggles of the writer of Ecclesiastes, the preacher. He struggles with these things, but he always acknowledges the fact that he was created and that there is a duty for him to perform the things that God has commanded. And we see in the wilderness, when Christ is faced with temptation, he quotes the law of God. He quotes the scriptures that have been given. So the ideas of thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, mind, soul, and body, and thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself, is rejected here by Nietzsche, and says that he must reject that and take upon himself the idea of I will, rather than accepting thou shalt. He says, thou shalt lieth in its path, sparkling with gold, a scale-covered beast, and on every scale glitters gold, thou shalt. The values of 1,000 years glitter on those scales, and thus spaketh the mightiest of all dragons. All the values of things glitter on me. All values have already been created, and all created values do I represent. Verily, there shall be no I will anymore, thus speaketh the dragon. So he's saying that God is saying that there is no I will. There is only a thou shalt. My brethren, wherefore is there need of the lion in the spirit? Why sufficeth not the beast of burden, which renounces and is reverent? To create new values, which is his goal. He was asking what the point of the values were. Now he's getting to the point of what Zarathustra is supposed to do. We are trying to create new values according to him for the individual. To create new values that even the lion cannot yet accomplish, but to create itself freedom for new creating. That can the might of the lion do, to create itself freedom, and give a holy nay even unto duty. For that, my brethren, there is need of the lion. And if we read the end of Ecclesiastes 12, it talks about what is the whole duty of man, to be obedient to the commandments of God. He is rejecting the duty of man here. He says to assume the right to new values, that is the most formidable assumption for a load-bearing and reverent spirit. Verily unto such a spirit it is praying, and the work of a beast of prey. As its holiest, it once loved thou shalt. Now is it forced to find illusion and arbitrariness even in the holiest things, that it may capture freedom from its love. The lion is needed for this capture. But tell me, my brethren, what the child can do, which even the lion could not do. Why has the praying lion still to become a child? Innocence is the child, and forgetfulness, a new beginning, a game, a self-rolling wheel, a first movement, a holy yea. So we go from the lion to the child because he wants renewal, because everything is recurring. There's an eternal recurrence. So there is a parallel here with the ideas of justification, sanctification, and glorification. You have the idea of the load-bearing camel being the humility that must be shown with regards to the faith that you must have to be justified before the holy God. You are bowing down to him. You then, in the lion, you are becoming who you are supposed to be. Your purpose is being fulfilled, and so you are being sanctified for this new creature that you're becoming. In the Bible, you're being transformed, glory to glory. And then, of course, the child is the glorification form that you take, the new form. The difference is that there is no hereafter. Everything with regards to Nietzsche is ascetic. He does not have any intrinsic value, and there's no eternity. There's no place beyond the body, place beyond the earth. And so when we read those things, and we look at what he was trying to accomplish, to create new values, to create a metamorphosis that would happen within man for the individual, we see that it's almost a wholesale rejection of communitarian ideas, but almost of social ideas. You could get to the point where anybody did anything they wanted. You couldn't really have a functioning society in any sense. And his rejection of things like nationalism, which he thought was a joke, he thought idiots were involved in that, which is ironic because it was used by the Nazis and it was used by his sister. He went too far, in my opinion, with regards to promoting individualism. There's nothing wrong with critiquing communitarianism, especially the extreme forms like Rousseau and Hegel. But when you go this far out, you end up going slightly crazy. You kind of go over the hill, which he, of course, another ironic twist to it, he actually did go insane and spent the last 10 years of his life as an invalid. But I'm going to talk about the two things that the Bible most rejects about Nietzsche's ideas here in Zarathustra, and specifically his ideas about the Superman. Number one, his cosmology. His cosmology of eternal recurrence. I'm going to read from Zarathustra here. Where are we at? We've got to go to 155. The eternal recurrence is a major, major deal. He says this, For behold, O Zarathustra, for thy new lays there are needed new lyres. Sing and bubble over, Zarathustra, heal thy soul with new lays, that thou mayest bear thy great faith, which has not been anyone's fate. For thine animals know it well, O Zarathustra, who thou art and must become. Behold, thou art the teacher of the eternal return. That is now thy fate, that thou must be the first to teach this teaching. How could this great fate not be thy greatest danger and infirmity? Behold, we know what thou teachest, that all things eternally return, and are and ourselves with them, and that we have already existed in times without number, and all things with us. Thou teachest that there is a great year of becoming, a prodigy of a great year. It must, like a sandglass, ever turn up anew, that it may anew run down and run out, so that all those years are like one another in the greatest and also in the smallest, so that we ourselves in every great year are like ourselves in the greatest and also in the smallest. And if thou wouldst now die, O Zarathustra, behold, we know also how thou wouldst then speak to thyself, but thine animals beseech thee not to die yet. Thou wouldst speak, and without tremble, buoyant rather with bliss, for a great weight and worry would be taken from thee, thou patient one. Now do I die and disappear, would thou say, and in a moment I am nothing. Souls are as mortal as bodies. Again, it's a rejection of intrinsic value. But the plexus of causes returns, in which I am intertwined. It will again create me. I myself pertain to the causes of the eternal return. I come again with this sun, with this earth, with this eagle, with this serpent, not to a new life or a better life or a similar life. I come again eternally to this identical and self-same life in its greatest and its smallest, to teach again the eternal return of all things. So he's saying that it's not like in the idea of being reincarnated. He's saying that eternity will actually completely repeat itself over and over and over. And so we see this is very different from the preacher's idea of what's to come has already been that he writes about in Ecclesiastes. He says, to speak again the word of the great noontide of earth and man, to announce again to man the Superman. I have spoken my word, I break down my word, so wills mine eternal fate. As announcer do I succumb. The hour has now come for the down-goer to bless himself. Thus ends Zarathustra's down-going. So we read the beginning of it, now we're reading the end of it, of his down-going, which he claims is the sacrifice to bring about the Superman that is needed. Down-going is necessary. So his cosmology is that everything will return in a self-similar way. Now the Bible completely rejects this. The Bible has something completely different to say about this. He says in Ecclesiastes 9, for all this I considered in my heart even to declare all this, that the righteous and the wise in their works are in the hand of God. No man knows either the love or hatred by all that is before them. All things come alike to all. There is one event to the righteous and to the wicked, to the good and to the clean, to the unclean, to him that sacrifices, to him that sacrifices not. As is the good, so is the sinner, and he that swears, as he that fears an oath. This is an evil among all things that are done under the sun, that there is one event unto all. Yea, also the heart of the sons of men is full of evil, and madness is in their heart while they live, and after that they go to the dead. For to him that is joined to all the living there is hope, for a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything, neither have they any more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Also their love and their hatred, their envy is now perished, neither have they any more portion forever in anything that is done under the sun. So we see that he does not believe in the eternal return, that you live your life once and then you die. And when we go to Hebrews 9, we see a similar idea, similar teaching here on the basis of Christ and the judgment that is to come. I think I'm getting this one right. Yeah, Hebrews 9. It says, for Christ is not entered into the holy places made with hands, which are the figures of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Nor yet that he should offer himself often, as the high priest enters into the holy place every year with blood of others. For then must he often have suffered since the foundation of the world. But now once, in the end of the world, has he appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. And as it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this the judgment, so Christ was once suffered to bear the sins of many, and unto them that look for him shall he appear the second time without sin unto salvation. And now, so he would say that we pity suffering when he's in his critique of Christianity, and that we pity the fact that people undergo suffering, and he claims that we are preachers of death, that anybody who holds metaphysical ideas are preachers of death and are not life-affirming. But the thing is that we don't worship or preach death. What we are preaching is that we do affirm suffering. The thing about suffering within the Christian life is that it is seen as something that is in fact necessary for glorification. That if we suffer for him, so shall we also be glorified with him. That we are to die in our sins, therefore being buried with him in baptism into his death, so that we may be risen again into his life. The point is about suffering and death is that those things are in and of themselves evil on the basis of sin, that those things are not natural. And so for Nietzsche, he would say that suffering and pain are something that should be seen as glorious and wonderful. And he really respected ascetics and people who were monks and so on like that. He didn't like the religious presuppositions they held, but he did like their lifestyles because he respected that. He believed that pain and destruction and evil was the way into new creation. But in fact, in the Bible, suffering is something that we go through in order to be glorified, because we are trying to defeat the suffering. Right, so we don't avoid it. We do try to help people because people are made in the image of God. There is an intrinsic value and an intrinsic worth, and I don't think you could have a society if you claimed otherwise. You have to have some metaphysical structure over the society you live in. You can't live as a group of individuals. Things would turn into madness if that were to occur. So there isn't this idea of an eternal recurrence, that what we do is determined. We actually have to make choices with regards to whether or not we're going to accept the suffering. or accept the situations that are before us in order to glorify God. Because the second issue that the Bible has with regards to Nietzsche, the first one being the cosmology, that in fact the world itself is not eternal, that it was created at a particular time. I think science also shows that. Most scientists would agree that there was a beginning to the universe and that there will be an end. And so there is an end to our lives. There is a beginning to our lives. There is an end to our lives. We do not carry on once we die. We are then judged. But the second thing is the idea of the telos. He rejected a purpose to man. There was no particular purpose that we are supposed to have. So when we read in Human All Too Human, we read that he says, when discussing the wanderer, he says, "He who has come only in part to a freedom of reason cannot feel on earth otherwise than as a wanderer, though not as a traveler towards a final goal, for this does not exist." Because there is no final goal for him. He has no telos for man. Man is not supposed to achieve anything in particular, because man is not worth anything. The type of purpose that man is supposed to have is one that is purely an aesthetic type of purpose. That is, you are supposed to make your life, which is recurring over and over, as a work of art, as Dionysian. And so he says that man in his action then cannot be seen as responsible for any particular thing that he or she does. In Aphorism 39, in Human All Too Human, on the history of moral feelings, he says the history of those feelings by virtue of which we consider a certain or a person responsible, the so-called moral feelings, is divided into the following main phases. At first we call particular acts good or evil without any consideration of their motives, but simply on the basis of their beneficial or harmful consequences. Soon, however, we forget the origin of these terms and imagine that the quality good or evil is inherent in the action themselves, without consideration of their consequences. This is the same error language makes when calling the stone itself hard, the tree itself green. That is, we take the effect to be the cause. Then we assign the goodness or evil to the motives and regard the acts themselves as morally ambiguous. We go even further and cease to give to the particular motive the predicate good or evil, but give it rather to the whole nature of a man. The motive grows out of him as a plant grows out of the earth. So we make man responsible in turn for the effects of his actions, then for his actions, then for his motives, and finally for his nature. Ultimately, we discover that his nature cannot be responsible either in that it is itself an inevitable consequence, an outgrowth of the elements and influences of past and present things. That is, man cannot be made responsible for anything, neither for his nature, nor his motives, nor his actions, nor the effects of his actions, and thus we come to understand that the history of moral feelings is the history of an error called responsibility, which in turn rests on an error called freedom of the will. So he rejects the freedom of the will, and in rejecting the freedom of the will, he rejects the moral responsibility of a human being, which means there is no particular purpose to anything that we end up doing. But the Bible completely rejects this, and there's a good point to Nietzsche here of why he's interesting, and I think somebody that everybody should read. He acknowledges that if we live in a deterministic world, you can't then claim that there's responsibility on anybody. Of course, this would mean essentially the destruction of society, because if you could not stop people and actually blame them for the things that they do, like murder or rape, then society couldn't exist because anybody could do anything. But he does acknowledge that if you reject the notions of God and soul and spirit, you can't place intrinsic value on anything. If you can't place intrinsic value on anything, then there's no way that you can actually claim that something is right or wrong. There is no right or wrong in the value system. And he called out atheists on this in his day for holding on or clinging on to Christian morality while claiming these liberal democratic values at the same time. He says you can't do that. If you reject the God, then you reject the whole thing that is built on top of the notion of God. And so in rejecting that, he took it all the way to the limits. He spoke about this, the fact that the power of the will and force itself, everything should be life-affirming. Again, this is something that is wholly rejected by the Bible, and for good reason. It's not just because we reject it in terms of societies couldn't exist, but because revelation itself, the revelation of God, goes beyond that. This is what, and I always go back to the sermon given by Paul on Mars Hill in Acts 17:24 through 31. He says that God made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwells not in temples made with hands, neither is worship with men's hands as though he needed anything, seeing he gives to all life, breath, and all things, and has made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation. And so we all come from the same person. We're all made of one by God, and we are made in his image. Therefore, there is an intrinsic type of equality that exists. But here is the purpose and the telos of man, that they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your poets have said, for we are also his offspring. So there is a purpose that we are supposed to seek God. That is the purpose and the telos of man. That is why he made us. He wanted to be in a relationship with us, because there is ultimately going to be a time of eternal judgment. This is what he says in 30 and 31. He says, the times of this ignorance God winked at, but now commands all men everywhere to repent, because he has appointed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man whom he has ordained, whereof he has given assurance unto all men, and that he raised him from the dead. So we're talking about the resurrection of Christ. Christ has been appointed to judge all men around the world, and so our responsibility and our duty is that we are to repent and come back to him, the one who made us, because there is an end. So there is no eternal recurrence biblically. There is no idea of an aesthetic type of figuring out your own meaning and purpose in life. God, by faith, we accept who God is, and he delivers what our purpose is supposed to be. So our actions are performed then under or within the context of us being created. We have to accept the notion of the Creator. So he says in Ecclesiastes 12:1, remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. So while you're able to do all of the things that you want to do, you need to remember that there was a Creator that made you, and that there's something beyond you that gives you your being, that gives you your life, and that you are moving in him, and you are supposed to be moving towards him, because there will be a day when the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, all is vanity. So you might not be able to grasp what that necessarily means for you, but there is a purpose wherein God has ordained for you to perform certain works that he has made you for, according to Ephesians 2:10, and your salvation comes by faith. So it is by grace through faith that we are saved, according to Ephesians 2:8 through 9. So that is what our purpose is supposed to be, that we in fact do have a duty that Nietzsche wholly rejects. This is what finally is said in Ecclesiastes 12:13 and 14 by the narrator, or the commentator of the book. He says, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. So there is your purpose. For God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. And there's your cosmology, that there is an end. There is a beginning in that he is your creator. There is an end in that he is your judge. And your duty in between that time is to do the things that he has revealed for us to do. And in rejecting this, we have to understand, because there are many people who would say, well, you can still act right even if you don't believe in God. And that is true. People can do that, but what you're still clinging on to is the notion of God, even when you do that, whether you believe in it or not. And because rejecting the God means affirming the totality of one's instincts. And I'm going to read some of the things that he says in The Twilight of the Idols, and then finally I'm going to finish with The Will to Power. When talking about Goethe, who he saw as a type of Superman, the type of the Übermensch, and he also saw it a little bit in Napoleon as well. He says, Goethe conceived of a strong, highly cultured human being, skilled in all physical accomplishments, who, keeping himself in check and having reverence for himself, dares to allow himself the whole compass and wealth of naturalness, who is strong enough for this freedom, a man of tolerance, not out of weakness but out of strength, because he knows how to employ to his advantage what would destroy an average nature, a man to whom nothing is forbidden, except it be weakness, whether that weakness be called vice or virtue. A spirit thus emancipated stands in the midst of the universe with a joyful and trusting fatalism. So, emancipating oneself from the crowd, from the herd, as he would say, from the slaves, as he would call them, allows you to have a certain type of faith that he finds wonderful. He says, in the faith that only what is separate in an individual may be rejected, that in the totality everything is redeemed and affirmed. That is, everything is affirmed. Every action, destruction, evil, good, whatever you may consider it to be, all of it is redeemed and affirmed. He no longer denies this. But such a faith is the highest of all possible faiths. I have baptized it with the name Dionysus. So the idea of the god of Dionysus is that he was the god of wine, that he celebrated. They would have celebrations and mystery rites that were orgiastic in nature in the Greek world, and they would do sort of mad things. There's ideas about people would get so drunk or have a spirit of madness come upon them, they would tear people apart, they would kill their own children and things like that. All of it was to be life-affirming, because all of it was an aspect of nature. And that is what he wanted people to get back to. And so that's what he says in the Twilight of the Idols. But this is what he says in The Will to Power. And The Will to Power was done, it was kind of used by the Nazis, I think, in the wrong way. His sister, I think his sister was the one who published this after his death, but it was supposed to be a massive book that he put together, but only the first part was written. And that part is massive. It's a really big book. But this is what he says in Book 4, Chapter 3 of The Will to Power. He says, and do you know what the universe is to my mind? Shall I show it to you in my mirror? This universe is a monster of energy, without beginning or end, a fixed and brazen quantity of energy which grows neither bigger nor smaller, which does not consume itself but only alters its face. As a whole, its bulk is immutable. It is a household without either losses or gains, but likewise without increase and without sources of revenue, surrounded by non-entity as by a frontier. It is nothing vague or wasteful. It does not stretch into infinity, but is a definite quantum of energy located in limited space, and not in space which would be anywhere empty. It is rather energy everywhere, the play of forces and force waves at the same time, one and many, agglomerating here and diminishing there, a sea of forces storming and raging in itself, forever changing, forever rolling back over incalculable ages to recurrence, with an ebb and flow of its forms, producing the most complicated things out of the most simple structures, producing the most ardent, most savage, and most contradictory things out of the quietest, most rigid, and most frozen material, and then returning from multifariousness to uniformity, from the play of contradictions back into the delight of consonance, saying yea unto itself, even in this homogeneity of its courses and ages, forever blessing itself as something which recurs for all eternity, a becoming which knows not satiety or disgust or weariness, this my Dionysian world of eternal self-creation, of eternal self-destruction, this mysterious world of twofold voluptuousness, this my beyond good and evil, without aim, unless there is an aim in the bliss of the circle, without will, unless a ring must by nature keep goodwill to itself. Would you have a name for my world, a solution of all your riddles? Do you also want a light, you most concealed, strongest, and most undaunted men of the blackest midnight? This world is the will to power and nothing else, and even you yourselves are this will to power and nothing besides. And so this is the whole, I think, of what he was trying to get at. The fact that that is his cosmology, the eternal recurrence, and that is his telos, the fact that There is no aim unless there is an aim in the bliss of the circle. So you're not going anywhere except trying to move in a horizontal sense to the Superman. And I think the most critical aspect that we can be with regards to him when we read about what he wants us to try to achieve with regards to the Superman. Not that things won't come back around, but this idea of the telos here, I'm going to read, I'm still in the prologue of Zarathustra. It says, "What is the greatest thing you can experience? It is the hour of great contempt, the hour in which even your happiness becomes loathsome unto you, and so also your reason and virtue. The hour when you say, what good is my happiness? It's poverty and pollution and wretched self-complacency, but my happiness should justify existence itself. The hour when you say, what good is my reason? Does it long for knowledge as the lion for his food? It is poverty and pollution and wretched self-complacency. The hour when you say, what good is my virtue? As yet it has not made me passionate. How weary I am of my good and my bad. It is all poverty and pollution and wretched self-complacency. The hour when you say, what good is my justice? I do not see that I am fervor and fuel. The just, however, are fervor and fuel. The hour when we say, what good is my pity? Is not pity the cross on which he is nailed who loves man? But my pity is not a crucifixion. Have you ever spoken thus? Have you ever cried thus? Ah, would that I heard you crying thus. It is not your sin, it is your self-satisfaction that cries unto heaven. Your very sparingness in sin cries unto heaven. Where is the lightning to lick you with its tongue? Where is the frenzy with which you should be inoculated? Lo, I teach you the Superman. He is that lightning. He is that frenzy. And so the ideas of all of these things, of happiness, of pity, and all of that should be completely rejected, because they are not in and of themselves life-affirming. The Superman is trying to get you to move in a horizontal line, to go beyond these things that we experience, beyond what we would say is good and bad. And so he says, Zarathustra, however, looked at the people and wondered, and then he spake thus, man is a rope stretched between the animal and the Superman, a rope over an abyss, a dangerous crossing, a dangerous wayfaring, a dangerous looking back, a dangerous trembling and halting. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal. What is lovable in man is that he is an overgoing and a downgoing. And so this is the main difference between his ideas and the scriptural ideas. The fact that we are trying to move horizontally. In the Bible, Jesus Christ, who became man, says the Son of Man, and it's crucial he says the Son of Man here. You will see upon the Son of Man angels ascending and descending. This is the same language used when Jacob in Genesis was trying to go to, he was running away from his brother Esau, and he started sleeping in the place called Luz. It was later called the city of Bethel. And he sleeps on this rock, and he sees the vision of the ladder going up to heaven, and it ascends and descends. The idea that Christ became man, the Son of God became the Son of Man, in order to be a ladder for us to transform. In 2 Corinthians 3:18 and 19, it says, or 17 and 18, it says that we are transforming glory to glory. We are moving upwards biblically in order to get to being as God. Seeing, we have to be able to see him to be as he is, according to 1 John 3:1 and 2. We have to ascend. We cannot move in a line horizontally. In order to get to the Superman, we are moving horizontally across a rope, that we're walking across an abyss, trying to go beyond man. The Bible says we're not going, the way to go beyond man is not moving. There is no progress. We're not moving forward in any way. We have to move upwards. And so the point of descending for Christ is so that we now can move upwards. He is trying to take us into heaven. That is the whole point of it. And so that is, I think, the main difference between the ideas of what he was trying to teach in Zarathustra. And I just want to talk about how you can ask the same questions, the same type of questions that the preacher is asking in Ecclesiastes, and come up with radically different conclusions. And I think that's important that we understand that it matters from your starting points, where you're starting from, and it matters that will ultimately speak to what type of conclusions you reach. And we have to think about the total. He was rejecting communitarianism. We see this in the 19th century. People like Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky, people that call this sort of proto-existential type writers. They were trying to focus on the individual because they were reacting against the communitarian ideas that were coming out. And sometimes when you're fighting against something, you end up going too far. When you're fighting against it, you want to take the opposite position, and you go over the hill. You go into madness and disaster. And we've seen some of Nietzsche's ideas being used to justify horrible disasters. And we also see the great irony of Nietzsche himself going insane and becoming an invalid. But there is a hereafter. There is a judgment. There is a God. There is a spirit. There is a metaphysical structure that holds our societies together. And obviously it's different culture to culture. And then even cultures who have the same types of metaphysical structures, they interpret certain things differently. Nevertheless, if you don't have these things, you can't have a society. You can't have a community where there are individuals saying that I will affirm everything. I will do whatever I want. That's not going to work. But he was a genius. He was a very interesting man, as is the writer of Ecclesiastes. The preacher is someone that also should be studied at length. But obviously we don't have the same amount of writings that we have from Nietzsche. So I just wanted to talk about that. This is sort of in this whole series of Ecclesiastes I'm doing. I'm going to look at other people who took up the same type of issues that the preacher took up in Ecclesiastes, and I'm going to talk about the conclusions they came to and how they came to them and why they should be rejected or accepted, and compare them with what the scriptures say. So I highly recommend reading and trying to study Nietzsche and studying his ideas, because I think they're definitely worthy of being studied, and see where they differ from the biblical ideas and see where he went off course, because there's a lot of people who also may be following some of these ideas, and hopefully they're not following them to their conclusions, but they're trying to find meaning in their lives, which is what Nietzsche wanted to do. He wanted to try and figure out a way, a program of understanding what values were in order to reach a type of meaning. For him, it was an aesthetic type of meaning, an artful type of meaning, and there's nothing wrong with that if that's an aspect of what you're doing, but you have to have an intrinsic goal. Seneca wrote in his letters, I think his 16th letter, that if you're a person who's doing something without a goal, you're not really a serious person. You have to have an end. You have to have a meaning to why you're doing what you're doing. If you don't, you're just sort of an inconsequential. It doesn't mean ultimately anything. And so to find meaning, we find it in Jesus Christ. So that's the bit for today. It went a bit longer than I thought it would, but if you liked it or if you completely disagree, let me know in the comments. Hit the like button, subscribe, and so on and so forth, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.